Hey, welcome to Writers Row, where we talk about writing, the writing community on Twitter, the business side of things, and the creative side of things. I'm your host for this episode, DC Wright-Hammer. On the
And
other
I am.
side,
Oh, I interrupted you. I am David Gane.
how are you tonight, David?
I am good. Yeah. How's the writing going, DC?
It's going okay. For those who have been watching the episodes I mentioned on our Writer's Block show several shows ago, that I had been struggling with writing. And since then, I've actually talked with a lot of different people to get their perspective and just did a lot of soul searching. And I think I have a game plan to get back to my previous form when I pumped out basically 250,000 words in about 18 months um, and two published books. So I think I can get back to that. I will keep everybody posted, but I'm really excited about it. Um,
Awesome. Good for you. By the way, my writing is going well as well,
yeah.
and but it has gotten to the point where I've put other people's writing or books aside so that
Mhm.
I can focus on my own writing. So, yeah.
And is the Shepherd and Wolf series, is that over?
No, we have two more. So we're working on those two. We're building a new series, and I've got another idea brewing right now. So we'll see what that does. So, yeah.
Cool.
What are we talking about this week, DC?
So this week, wanted to take a step back of everything, dig back into the creative side of writing, and basically ask the question, what should the expectations be for a storyteller? And so, us as authors, we're storytellers, but we can open this up to see where the conversation goes to discuss cinema, discuss television, just storytelling, interpersonally, and see where it goes from there. Um, One of the things I wanted to mention on this episode is something that's kind of personal to me. I've been in part of Campfire Tales. So if you can just picture, there people probably haven't been part of as many as you've seen in the TV shows and whatnot. But when I think storytelling, that always comes to mind, and I always think of how that is usually a very organic way of storytelling. It's very much dark. We're in the woods. We're by a campfire. We've got a setting already in place. People are a little on edge because they're not in their cozy homes. They're not necessarily comfortable where they normally are. And then typically somebody who is very creative and attempting to elicit fear, usually be scary, will start telling a campfire tale. And my cat likes campfire tales, so she's chiming in right now. Um, but the thing I like about that concept is that it's sort of three-dimensional storytelling. It takes the setting where the people are at physically, and then allows the storyteller to take advantage of that by telling creepy stories and things like that. I'm gonna have to do something with this cat. I think she's hungry, but she's gonna get food really soon.
We'll see how the show goes, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, she's gonna be the co-host in just a minute here.
Well,
So
you know what? You should pick the cat up and love it during the show. That's what I say.
that means a lot coming from you, David.
So, okay, so when you're talking about, have you done a lot of campfire stories?
Just a couple actually by a campfire. A couple when I was a kid and one when I was adult. But then just like sleepovers where you have half a dozen friends and somebody knows this hand-me-down story from generation to generation, and then they make it relevant to today, usually by putting a fun spin on it. And it's always dark. It might be a flashlight if it's not a campfire, and just trying to captivate the audience. And typically they're not professional storytellers or anything like that. It's just fun.
Okay, so here's you use the word captivate the audience. To
Hmm?
me, that's probably kind of connecting to your idea of the expectations of a storyteller,
Yep.
right? Um, are you saying so when you talk about expectations of a storyteller, what are you thinking? What is your expectation of a storyteller? Let's start there.
Right.
I've totally taken it over now.
You're hosting. It's a very fluid show. Um, I think, first off, um, you have to identify who the storyteller is. And I don't mean who the writer is or whatnot, but what is moving a story forward. So who is helping me get through the story? In a lot of cases, that's a main character. You're following a main character. In some cases, it's a lot of main characters, depending on what it is. And then for, more less character-driven pieces, the storyteller can be just a narrator, just somebody who's just telling you a story. Expectations for those people, for me, get set when I know kind of what I'm getting into. What kind of story is it? Do I have an idea of, the plot? Do I have a synopsis in mind going in? And then what are they working with? What kind of resources do they have to tell the story? What I mean by that is, who's writing it? Is it somebody with a doctorate in writing and composition? And are they writing flowing prose to do, XYZ telling their story? Or is it a college student who just has a really cool idea and they want to get their story out? To me, who the storyteller is sets my expectations to some extent.
Okay, so I wanna dig into this. So you've defined the narrator of the story, but you're also defining the author of the story, correct? Okay. And do you have certain expectations for the narrator of the story? Or just expectations of the author of the story?
Well, I think that's where there's a fine line. A good narrator, a well-written or well-narrated story makes you forget about the creator in a lot of cases. If it's immersive, if it makes sense, in my opinion, the storyteller can be in the story in and of itself, and you forget that I'm actually reading somebody's work. This is like almost as if it was transcribed and I found an old document and it was telling me this story and history. And so I think that's where I come from storyteller. Like, I want to be in the story. I want to feel like I'm part of it. I want to feel like it's something I can put my imagination to. And there's a little bit of escaping into the story. A lot of times we want to just feel like we're part of it, get out of reality for a minute and enjoy this story, or at least have emotions, feel for this story.
But is your expectation of what you should expect from story the same as everyone else's, or do you believe that everyone will have different versions of that?
No, absolutely.
People not only just what should happen in the story, but how that story is told. So, we were talking just before we started the show about, some people want much more description than, say, you and I want, right? Where we like that kind of streamlined action response storyline, where a lot of stories have a lot more description, or it's the storyline may be more open-ended, which to me is a different expectation, closed versus opened. Causality versus randomness is another thing that some people love, the randomness, where others want the causality, right? So I think we're kind of dancing around the one thing that we kind of got into this conversation about, and I was hoping you'd get right into it, is that we had this discussion a couple of days ago about a recent episode of Game of Thrones, and you felt that it fell short of what should have happened in it, and how it was told and stuff like that. But then, and I'm less interested in talking about what should have been in that story, as more opposed to Um, were your expectations different from what the storyteller's expectations were, or other audience members' expectations were?
Right.
And then also, if they actually did fall short, why did they fall short of those expectations? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Lot to unpack there.
I
And
know. I was like, yeah, this might as well turn this into a
like
5-hour show. Okay,
four,
enjoy.
right, four point question with three tangents and four parentheses. Anyway,
That's the expectations from.
the so okay, so I've said kind of on Twitter and around that I was not satisfied with the episode, and my dissatisfaction actually doesn't have to do with um, the story arc that's basically coming out of it, and in that spoiler alert for people who haven't seen
No,
episode
no, don't
five.
spoil. No spoils.
Um, No, well, a main character goes bad that was foreshadowed for a long time, and I felt that the storytelling of that transition was very hurried, was very much um, going from foreshadowing to just all of a sudden it's here, and there was no mechanism to trigger that. There was nothing pressing in the moment that it happened to make a character go from what we knew them to be for so long. We had about an episode and a half, maybe, building a case against that character, and then suddenly they go from basically savior to genocidal maniac in a heartbeat. And that's where I think, going back to my point before, is it's not whether I thought that could happen. I thought it could happen because of the foreshadowing. It's whether I thought it should. And that pulled me out of the story and made me think of the decisions that the creators had to make to get to this point where they literally waited a minute, maybe, minute and a half, bells ringing, and then suddenly this thing is going down. It's just happening. And I'm supposed to be like believing that. Ruse. This may or may not make the cut, but that's okay. Get up here if you want. Do you want to get up here? Can you be quiet?
Ruse, go on up.
Go on up. She's probably going to keep making noise, but
Okay,
anyway.
so you're gonna have to put big spoilers warnings at the start of this episode, right?
Yes.
Yes. So, and another part of this question that we had when we were talking about expectations is, I asked you what did you feel was required from the filmmakers, the creators, the creative staff. And when I talk about creative staff, I mean so many people that are part of this, right? It's not just, everyone likes to dump on just the creators of the show, but there's also the writers, the directors, production, like the producers, the network. Everyone has their input into this. So you were hoping, if you could have fixed it with like the simplest way possible, it was just giving just a little bit more of a moment to make this is happening, and now I'm going to make a decision because of these things. There was never a moment where you had a because in your head that was on the screen, right?
Well, and I think that's been the case with the latest season of Game of Thrones, that they've got dozens of plot lines that they wanted to wrap up. And I can appreciate that, especially when you're getting to the end of something as epic as this. You want some closure, you want to wrap things up, you want to be able to put a bow on it at the end and make it, this is done. I think the way they've gone about doing that is to sort of make stuff happen. And The reason why I have a problem with that is because the show's formula has always been suspense, cliffhangers, drawing things out, and multi-scheming. The last one meaning like there's multiple different players trying to vie for positions and things like that. The last one I'm okay that they didn't do as much because they're wrapping things up. They can't start new plots, so they had to really keep that. And they might have been trying to discipline themselves by saying, oh, this big reveal, we're just going to do it in this episode. And this other big reveal, it's going to happen in the next episode because we just kind of need it to happen. And then in this next episode, this character is going to die because we kind of need them to die. And we'll give them a couple of decent pieces of dialogue in the beginning, but it ends up being somewhat of a throwaway because of how quickly things are just moving.
Yeah.
And so my pushback to that is I get the business side. We were talking earlier that there's hundreds of millions of dollars on the line here. There's people's reputation. There's people's ability to influence decisions, even at the story level, above and beyond what the creators proper are doing, including George R.R. Martin, who's a consultant, and everybody else who's on it. I get all that. There's still a way to tell the best story you can, even within those constraints. And I feel disappointed at the way they've gone about doing it. That's where I'm at. It's not, I get the business side of it. And if this is the best story they could have told in that, then they've led me astray the last, and I'll even give them 6 seasons, because they've, and you know, people are like, oh, the source material. But you've lived and breathed the source material for the last 8 years, or 7 years at least. If you're truly a creative mind who can take a story to the next level, I don't think you need to have George R.R. Martin write a novel to help you do that. That's just my opinion. I have high expectations.
Okay.
For storytellers at the highest level with the most resources.
So, and then this was another question that kind of brought about this discussion was, and I kind of want to bring it back to Campfire Tales, is that cannot a good storyteller screw up and tell a bad story?
Oh,
or
sure.
Once you know, whatever makes you become a great storyteller, whatever defines that, because I think that's in its own way a dangerous thing to say. How do you keep yourself from having that happen? Because I think sometimes we think our stories are good and they're not good. Because as I said to you, no one usually goes out to make a dud of a story, right? Everyone's trying to give it the best intentions. Now, sometimes there's some of those intentions are just money, but even then, right? So my question is, you know, let's go back to our Campfire Storyteller. They tell the story, no one responds to it. And it's not because of the story they told, but the audience or maybe something interfered with that moment or whatever, right? There's either the things that they can control or the things that are outside their control. And for some people, it's like, you know the story inside and out, but you show up at the page and the scene doesn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter how much you work the crap out of it. So what do you like? You expect the best, but what happens when that happens?
I think it's inevitable. I think the best storytellers will have duds.
Yes.
And I think even in the Campfire story scenario, that most of them were duds, actually, because the expectations and the stakes of the story were so low that really usually what it was to try to find out if somebody could tell those stories, if somebody could be a captivative storyteller. And so I think it was just clowning around to some extent. And I could never suspend disbelief really enough to get scared. I was always like, what? We're here. What? It's just a dark room. What? It's a campfire. Like, it was a little scary in the woods because a bear could maybe maul you or something like that. But
That's why
um,
you integrate the bear into the story.
you kind of have to. It has to be something regarding your surroundings and something. Um, but when the stakes get higher, I, I'm even okay with like the concept in TV shows of like a throwaway episode where they know they have to piece together a couple storylines and they can't necessarily tell it in a compelling way. I think early on in The Walking Dead, they did a couple of throwaway episodes where they had to wrap up some storylines um, and make sure you knew where a couple characters were going to be. So in the following episode, they could do a really cool plot twist or something like that, or take the story in another direction. Um, I'm okay with those in, as a story's building or as a show or a series of books or something like that. You could have like not necessarily a throwaway chapter, but chapters that are more bridges than they are solid pieces of story. But when you get to the end of the, critically acclaimed, award-winning TV show, you no longer have time to do that. I felt like episode 1 was a nice in the latest episode or latest season of Game of Thrones was a nice reminiscent episode, but not a ton happened. They just kind of gathered all the characters together. Hey, you remember all these characters? Great. Hey, oh, here's what's at stake. Okay, fine. Episode 1, I guess. But I thought episode 2 was kind of like that too. Again, oh, now we're just taking them, to the next step. And then the fight scenes that were long and drawn out, I thought were okay, but I thought that more substance could have been in place of them, and I think the show would have gone a little better as a result. I think she's passionate about it.
I just love that she goes away and then she returns.
Yes.
And then she goes away.
So I don't know. I guess I'm going to flip the question on you. I think to some extent you're getting at like, let the creator be the creator. How the story's told is how the story's told. I'm putting words into your mouth so you can disagree. And
you always put words into my mouth.
Right. So I guess, so what do you think? I mean, should we have high expectations for the creators at sort of the highest in their industry? And if not, or, when is it not okay for them to do throwaways, I guess? Or when do we say enough is enough? You're just producing content to produce content or something like that.
I feel like that's a little off from what I think I'm getting at. I'm always kind of torn. This is what I'm when I think of, say, the Game of Thrones episodes. I definitely didn't respond the same way you did. Uh-huh. I didn't have as much of I didn't respond. I didn't mind it. But I also, since I watched it, having conversations with you, I see a lot of your points. I see the internet's outrage, but I also have seen other people who are like, yeah, no, I enjoyed the show and I had no problems with it, right? They felt like what was needed to be on the page was on the page, right? And that it did exactly what it needed to do. So that's where I'm always thinking, okay, some people are on board, some people are not. So then that's audience expectations, which is one of those things that you can't control. But I also know that, and I early on, we had the conversation when we were having the conversation before this conversation. I said I really wanted to know how that writing room works. Who has the say? Who doesn't have the say? Who can steer things in different directions? Because so many people saw that script. So many people saw it. The episode. Was there ever a moment they said, oh, we need to do a reshoot, or we need to add this moment, or we need to add this scene, or something like that? So I kind of wonder about that. But this weird other thing about me thinks two things. They watched it and they said, "Yeah, we got it. We're good." Right? Like
Right.
they were confident that they did what they needed to do. And if you feel that way and yet you miss the ball, then you know. And my fear is always that that could happen to any of us, right? You think you got it, and you totally did not see the obvious thing. And
Right.
I'll be when I'm writing, I'll be doing this thing, and I'm like, oh crap! Like this thing was sitting there, and I didn't even notice it until the last moment. So that kind of crossed my mind. And then the other thing is like, I wonder if there's uh a moment when the writing just doesn't come. You can't figure out the story problem or something like that on those final episodes. Like, could you imagine having to experience that? Like, you show up at the page and you're like, I'm just not feeling it. I don't know what to do about this scene.
Yeah, but I don't know the number of writers, but there's plenty, I imagine,
Oh
several
yeah,
writers. I
you can bounce it off to somebody else and
and I
bridge
bet you
the
there
gap.
was a dozen or more permutations of how the final season could get to where it needed to get to, and then
Yeah,
how it, could eventually end. I'm still hopeful for the last episode, um, and to some extent, that can actually forgive a lot of the storytelling that the final episode delivers. But part
but
of
see,
me,
there's expectations on something that probably
live up.
cannot even fulfill that, right?
Right. Well, but that's the thing. I think no, I think I can change and set my expectations. If I'm reading out of my genre, automatically, if first off, if I'm going to read it, it's because I want to read it. And
Yeah,
so I'll purchase a lot of indie author books out of my genre, and I'm open-minded. My expectations aren't very high in terms of like, oh, this has to satisfy what I want in a story. My expectations are, hey, this is a different genre, and I feel like I'm spending time with a friend to some extent, and I want to see what they wrote. And I tend to give them the benefit of the doubt more so than somebody with a 6 or 7 figure salary who is making these decisions for the entertainment of the masses. Hundreds of millions of people or whatever it is at this point. And so what I think with that, I think that I don't give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't have much sympathy for them, and I think high expectations are good. And that's not me saying so. Like if I read my indie, like I still want to read good writing. I still want to have a story in my head that's clear, and I still want to be in a different place in the end than when I began. And whatever that is, like I personally, I write plot twists, I write suspense, and I write mystery. Not who done it mystery, but you have a narrative that it's unreliable and it's taking you places. And there's some red herrings, but I don't even try to get into red herrings too much because you that tends to be distracting more than anything. But I also don't want the payoff to be right there. So this is my expectations for myself as a storyteller is I want to tell a compelling, sort of mystery-driven, character-driven story that is more of an adventure. It takes the reader from one place, and by the end, they've gone on this crazy journey, and they've gotten there. That's my expectation for my writing, and that's what I want to give to my readers. Um, I think when you have stakes that are high, like in Game of Thrones, I think you start off telling that story. You have cool source material. You've got a fan base, and then as that fan base grows, pressure gets more and more, and you just kind of have to make decisions at a certain point. And unfortunately, that means the storytelling in a lot of cases is not as good. I think the story. What's funny is I think the Game of Thrones story is fine. Like the story itself, how it's being told is the problem I have. That's it. The story I'm actually fine with. I know because they did set this up. And so
Yeah.
people are like, oh, you have a problem with that character going bad. I have no problem with that character going bad. I wanted that character to go bad. That's cool. But I wanted to go bad provoked that character, not her. Anyway, spoiler alert.
Tons of spoilers.
And it will be in the description below. Anyway, I've kind of mentioned that. Anything else about storytelling? Do you consciously think of storytelling while you're writing? You're like, how am I telling this story, or what do you bring, as you're writing? Is it just get through the scene, get through this, or do you have this bigger picture, or does that come later in the writing process for you?
Well, I feel like this is a whole different episode, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay.
Why don't we come back to it? Because it touches upon, for me, it touches upon outlining not just the book, but the series, plus, how I write in general with the shape of a scene and the shape of a chapter and everything like that. So.
Okay, so it sounds like you do some overarching things, at least ahead of time.
Oh yeah, no. Like we know what we've known what the final sentence of our 5-book series is since book 2.
Okay. I know, I think my series is going to be 5 books, and I know the last scene, not necessarily the last line, but yeah.
So. Yeah. No, and there's lots of stuff we're filling in as we go, but we know where we are going.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Maybe that actually is a good place to end this episode.
Fantastic place.
Shift to shameless self-promotions. Are they self-promotions this week or what?
Well, what do you want to self-promote? That fantastic t-shirt that you're wearing?
So, as you see here, I finally wore the shirt that I was kindly given by Mr. Gane, Write Like a Mofo, which is available on cunosandgane.com, along with his books and
DC's book,
other books,
and W.B. Welch's book, Blood Drops, a collection of short stories that are horror. So there's that. And then we have got our newest book on there now.
Hey.
Don Hosmer's, actually, I don't know. Is it Hosmer or Hosmer? Don, I'm sorry. I don't know.
I think it's Hosmer, but
okay.
now I've put that out there, and if I'm wrong, then now I look like a jerk.
Don, just text us and tell us, please.
I'm going to say Hosmer and not Hosmer, because
Hosmer sounds better. Hosmer. That's the danger of Twitter. Anyways, bits and pieces. It's a little bit of I'm going to say science fiction, a little bit of psychological thriller. Yep. Not science fiction like your science fiction, no. So,
is it speculative fiction?
Yeah, let's go with that. It's,
cool.
The premise is that when the main character touches people, she has flashes of emotions, memories, and memories, emotions, and talents.
Mm-hmm.
So, you tap somebody and suddenly you can speak French kind of idea.
Cool.
Yeah. So, anyways, that is our newest book on our Friends of Cunos and Gane on our website at www.cunosandgane.com, which will be down in the diddly-doos, right?
It's true. You also don't have to say www anymore. It's 2019.
I want it. The World Wide Web.
Why aren't you saying HTTPS boards? Anyway, I'm actually going to promote. I got this book in the indie book box. This is, let's see if I can get it.
You're going to get it sooner or later.
Right.
I can see William's name.
The Unfortunate Expiration of Mr. David S. Sparks. It's by William F. Aicher. He actually runs the indie book box, which my book was part of at one point. I think it's still part of it. They're cycling through it. I'm going to put the link to his book, which is actually free on Amazon. If you're an Amazon Prime member, you can get a copy of this for free on ebook. But you should support him by purchasing a copy. Most importantly, subscribing to the Indie Book Box. I'm going to put a link in the diddly-doos down below. Is that what it is? Did I get it right?
Doobly-doos, diddly-doos, whatever I come up with.
As well as just to the book in general, so you'll be able to get that as well.
All right. Why don't you promote your website, your fantastic new website?
Yeah, Wright-Hammer.com. I got the domain because it's a cool domain, cool last name. It's out there if you want autographed copies of my book, and so now it's shameless self-promoting. Blur.
Again.
Right. Anyway, if you want autographed copies of book 1 and book 2 of my series, you can definitely go out to my website and order them, and I will ship them to you myself with my signature on them.
Awesome.
My cat won't ship anything, though.
And since I'm from Canada, if you want it from like his Canadian distributor.
There we go. It's officially legit.
So awesome. Well, thanks. Cool. Thanks for this show.
Yep. Thanks, David, and thanks everybody who's watched this long.
It was a long watch, wasn't it?
Not so long. It's fine.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.